7.12, consideration of transgender policy.
Folks, I put this on the table or asked to have it put on the table. Honestly, I think it needed to be socialized. There was a lot of discussion at the time about allowing the community and really having members of the faculty, the administration, other voices to be involved in developing policy. And it is in our best interest to ensure that we communicate that across all members of this community. Sitting in the audience with students who, by the way, are also taking their finals that week, spoke volumes to me. And I would ask that the board reconsider this policy in the way that we do business, especially when it comes to implementing policies from other districts. There's not a problem with getting other policies from other districts. Not at all. But does it fit the needs of our community, of our students? Does it address the concerns that parents, students, teachers, and administrators have? I did not see any type of a staffing piece. And maybe it's just something that we're just not used to doing, but other voices in the tent, pretty important to hear them so that we understand that when we do develop policies, that the policies are not disadvantaging or discriminating by nature, something that really all students, all families in this community need to have their voices heard. So I ask that the board that we reconsider this, because there were some great comments that were made by members here about slow your roll, just a minute. We can do that. We can do these things. It's okay, and this is not about values. This is not about politics. This isn't about any. This is about our kids. This is about our families. And I know we have a lot of strong beliefs in this community. At the end of the day, our job is to look out for our students. And I do not want to rush into any type of a policy that by any chance we have not done our due diligence. The discussion about Title IX, right? If you had seen in one of the links that was provided by our Title IX rep about what is covered in there from the Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Education. I'm not a lawyer. I don't spend a whole lot of time on just trying to go drive everything down. But one of the things that jumped out at me is the protection of transgender. So I would ask that the board, that we have a discussion, that we may, I would say something a little bit more gently, like, let's just pull this thing back for a minute. Let's give it a little bit of time to put it together. Get a group of really, really smart people from the communities that are involved, that are affected by this, and come up with a better policy.
Pete, could you tell me what it is about this policy that you have a distaste for?
It's not a distaste, Mary. It's just simply the way we bring things up around here. I just feel like we've got to have a better mechanism, So if I may, I would just like us to see it where we have transparency, where we have communication, where we get feedback. That's all.
So would you be suggesting on every policy that we bring forth, from the ones that KSB sends us twice a year, any policy that is brought forth by Marty or another administrator or a board member, that on all of those policies, to be fair, that we collect community input, parent input, teacher input, staff input? I can't remember what else you mentioned. Or is it just this particular policy?
Amy, I will tell you that I think whenever we have a policy that affects our students, and when we deal with something that, hang on, let me finish. So when we think about something as direct as topics of gender or safety or bullying or all the things that are associated with it, that we apply judgment. We apply the judgment that's there to include, and I know you guys have hard opinions on KSB, and I got it, because I look at some of those things too, and I'm going, I don't know how this fits either. But especially when it comes to something like, if it's USD 231 that put it together, why USD 231?
Is this
Well,
conversation about the transgender student policy, or is it about how we put forth an approved policy? I think that would help if we could
I
define that
think what
first.
this is, Kristen, it's about both. It's about both
Okay,
issues.
which
So
one do
let
we
me,
want to tackle first?
well, I want to talk about, I would like to go and rescind the policy that we have right now and put it for a committee or a board, leave it to Marty, perhaps, develop a tiger team, develop a policy, if this policy is needed.
I know that you mentioned that you were not interested in policies possibly from other entities, like another district, or you think that they should be
I-
made. Can I finish my thought, please? You wanted to finish yours. Our policy book, can't keep a finger on both and lift this, so 1 second. Almost all of those policies are policies that are for every district in the state of Kansas. KASB develops most of them. These are not policies that are geared just towards Lansing or that have taken an input from all of the sources that you mentioned. So this is, my point in saying that is that this is not an odd occurrence on how a policy is made, and directed. The policy too, I know that you say that you want to get other input, but are some things to consider on a policy. For instance, when we took our oath to the Constitution, the 14th Amendment guarantees parents the right to direct the upbringing and education of their children. This addresses that, with secrets not being kept. We also have to follow FERPA. I don't know if you're familiar with that or if you've studied that, but we have to follow that. There was a case in Kansas, the Rickard case, that was determined that school districts were not following that. In Skyward, there was information regarding students that did not match what the parents were looking at, and I'm not saying that that is happening here at Lansing. I hope that it isn't, but that information is guaranteed federally for the parents to be able to view and know what is going on with their child, including preferred pronouns, social transitioning, things like that. We could lose federal funding for that. We have, I know that it is mentioned, Attorney General Kobach sent a letter to school districts who are not complying with these issues. Some say that doesn't, Kansas law does not dictate that, but what he was referring to was, again, the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Can't keep these secrets from parents. I can't imagine that a parent would be okay with a school district keeping these secrets. That's what this addresses. It also brings into detail Senate Bill 180, which was passed, about the restroom and locker room use. It also brings in House Bill 2567, which was passed, which doesn't allow the survey of students without a parent's opt-in. That's why we're saying in this policy, they cannot ask a student's preferred pronouns, say like in a get to know you survey or other issues. And again, no matter what policy a district may want, it can't trump state law. Even if we come up with our own Lansing policy because we determine that maybe a majority of students or parents want a certain thing, that still doesn't trump state law or the Constitution or FERPA. We still have to follow those items. So I don't know if any of the board members are willing to do that, to violate that.
I'm just really worried
I
about
wanna
the
know-
legality. I'm sorry, Amy, but to protecting the parents, protecting the students, protecting our teachers. Why are we throwing that on them? And even our counselors, I mean, are our counselors qualified to handle a situation like this? I just think that if a student has an issue, yes, they can go to the counselor, and then the counselor can refer on to a professional that can handle that along with the parents. I do not want to have my name attached to anything that hides any information, that keeps any information away from the parent. I do not want my name attached to that.
I don't, me personally, that's not what this is about. And I'm speaking for myself here. When you guys, former board put this in place in December, am I correct on that month? It didn't seem like there was much talk about it, and it was pretty sudden. And what I would like to see us do is, it's not mandated. A transgender policy is not mandated by the state, I don't believe. Is it, Marty?
Well, I just don't
But
want
if we
to
don't have
delay.
a policy, how do
Uh,
the teachers know what to follow?
Right. And I
How do they
understand-
know what to do?
I understand that. But I would just like us to take a step back and make a policy that fits Lansing.
Okay, can you tell me just a little bit about this policy? What is different that you would want? Okay, because you're saying you have some suggestions. Can you tell me right now?
I'm
what-
not sure I have a lot of suggestions.
Mary, I think,
Mary,
let me
what I-
ask.
What I would like to see is people with the knowledge, people that are trained, that can give us advice so that we can develop a policy.
My understanding of, when I look at that policy that was adopted, the only thing that it doesn't, that's extra, that's not compliant with state law, is that we have stated that there's no secrets kept from parents. And that's my understanding of basically the key difference between this policy and anything else we choose to adopt. And so all we're doing is the only thing that policy tacked on is we're not to keep this from parents. Am I incorrect in that? Because I think everything else is pretty much state law already.
You're correct.
So if we were to send that to a committee, and which, some of the students have voiced, a desire to have bathroom equality, but that's just not a feasible thing. I would hate for us to send that out to the community, solicit input and say, well, no, we can't do that because it's just illegal. And I don't want to rescind a policy because right now we have the protection that it's offering. We can always modify it and change it to meet our needs now, but to just ditch it seems irresponsible.
Okay. I was on the board in December. Did I vote against it because it read 231, Gardner, Edgerton, whatever? Yes. Okay, but at the same knee-jerk reaction that I felt in December is the same knee-jerk reaction that I feel right now. So, please let me finish. Until you have brought a policy forward that you feel is Lansing's, until you, if you feel that we need a policy that's Lansing's, then let's put a committee together. Let's have Marty lead it. Let's have that as a first read and a second read before we start dismantling anything. The problem I have is if you yank something out and you don't have something to take its place, or you don't have something that you can tell the public, then basically all you're doing is you're pulling something out and giving every person that came to speak today the same fear that they had, which is why they came to the meeting and spoke. So develop your policy that you would like to replace a policy with, present it to the board, have a first read, have a second read, and then make a motion to replace a policy so that you have something directly there that every person that came today can read, digest, come and speak, email about. If we're talking about transparency, that's how you show transparency.
What is
Would it-
not transparent?
Would it be possible for that policy?
And why can't we leave the policy in place and then get your committee together and then work up the verbiage that you'd
That's
like to see on it?
exactly what I just said.
Leave
Would
the
it be
policy in-
possible to
I-
send,
Okay, is that what, I'm sorry, did you say leave the policy in place? I
I said-
misunderstood. I
I-
misunderstood that. So, okay, leave the policy in place, and if you want to get your committee together and
Don't we already have a policy committee?
yeah, I was gonna say, can we send that to, if
Well,
you want to keep something in policy, why
It's,
would?
it's one of those things where this is the time where we get to talk. And this is the time where we get to direct, and we get to direct the gentleman that we hired to lead our district. So my suggestion, as my one vote of 7, is we give direction to the man that we hired to do the job. We tell him how we want this to be developed as a committee, either sending it to the committee policy or getting pooling from parents that came and spoke and our demographic that we live in, and then putting together a first read And before that first read happens, it will be in our board agenda minutes and every single person in Lansing can read it. And then we have our first read like we typically have. And we go through it and we digest it as a group. And then we present it the following month with our second read. That second read is normally when we did all of our voting. I'm not saying we're pulling out a policy tonight. I'm saying if we want to do better for the people that we're here to serve, you don't yank something out and have nothing to replace it. You develop your policy and then you replace it with something that you feel is more Lansing.
Well, I feel like a lot of the people voiced their opinion, the majority of them, that
Could I
they like the
ask,
policy.
Could I ask, Marty, could I ask you a question? Put you on the spot here. How has the policy been received with staff, and have you had suggestions, or has there been a problem implementing the policy since it's been put into place in December?
There hasn't really been an issue with implementing it because this isn't a real frequent situation that we encounter. However, I have had questions for staff about clarification. So in other words, when we say notifying the parents, if a student comes to a staff member and says, hey, you know, I've got a question about whether it's a transgender issue, whether it's a sexual preference issue, whatever it may be. And that teacher refers them on to the counselor. Is that teacher then supposed to call the parent that they referred them on to the counselor? The fear is that students won't come forward to be able to get any counseling or to receive any help. Our counselors are trained. They go through school, they get a master's degree in counseling in order to work with students and to be able to handle these situations, but they're also trained on when to refer it on to someone else, whether it be the counseling center or others. And so, you know, we would be confident that occurs. But I think that the main feedback I've gotten is how can we have kids continue to kind of come to us with these issues and balance that with the parents' need to know or right to know, but at the same time, not drive students away from having those conversations. And if I tell the student to go talk to a counselor and I don't call their parent, am I going to be held to account for that? Because I know that it's moving on to the counselor, and then at some point that counselor will help that child have that conversation with their parent.
Yeah, under the policy, it says that the teacher shouldn't be having that conversation. It should be directed to the counselor, and then the counselor would notify the parents. So I agree that, we cannot make our decisions based on, you know, whether or not a child will come forward or not, because we can't say, okay, you can come forward no matter what. We're going to keep these secrets from your parents, because that's not our job. That's the parents' job. Job here is to educate the children on reading, writing, arithmetic. I know that sounds simple, but it's pretty black and white, and we can't have a gray area on when we're going to keep a secret and not let a parent know, in my opinion, on any counseling issue.
Just to clarify, and I may not have, and I sometimes don't explain things well, but just on the clarification piece, the reaction I got or any of the questions I got from staff wasn't, this needs to be kept a secret from a parent. It was more of, if I refer it on to the counselor, am I then responsible for contacting that parent? Because I know the counselor may work with that student to have that conversation with their parent.
I think we could move to amend that to add, you know, the responsibility, or maybe you can put that in the job description of the counselor. We could amend the job description. We could amend the handbook or anything like that. I agree with Aaron, though, that I don't believe that we should revoke a policy just to gain input from others. Not that we can't receive input, but if you receive input and you come up with a change on your own, there was nothing presented or brought forward as far as a change. So, and we do have a policy committee to work policies, and that could work with Marty So at
So
the very most, I would
I'm sorry.
suggest that.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. So I'm listening. I really am. And part of the language that I kind of have a problem with is teacher is not supposed to have a conversation with that student. What if that teacher has developed such a great relationship and that's the person in this world that kid trusts?
Have they received training on that mental health issue though?
Well, I'm not saying necessarily give advice and, this is what you should do. But I would certainly hope that teacher would listen, reassure the student, and then try to get the kid in to see the counselor. The counselor, how many counselors we have at the high school? 3, 4, they're not going to know every kid.
3.
So, right? Okay, so there's a much better chance that a teacher is going to connect with that student and that student is going to feel more comfortable coming and talking to that teacher.
Wouldn't that teacher then just say, hey, we love you and we care about you. Let me walk you to the counselor's office so you can get some help that you need for whatever it is.
In a perfect world, yes, I think that could be something that could be said, but I also think that there are those times when the kid is scared and there needs to be a conversation that,
Do we have a system right now that allows for teachers to do an anonymous referral to the guidance counselor for a student? And I also wondered if a student is seen by a guidance counselor, does that trigger a notification to the parent? Like if they go to the nurse's office, you get a little notice. If they see the guidance counselor, would a parent get that notice?
Not in every single case, no. But when it escalates, the counselors are trained to contact parents. So in other words, let's say a student comes to a counselor and says, I'm confused today about what I'm doing or how I'm feeling about this. That counselor may work with that student to say, have you shared this with your parents? Have you gone through this process? Now, if the student gets to a point and they're saying, I want to change my pronoun, I want to change my name, I want to change my gender within the system, then absolutely they're contacting them. But at the very initial stages, I wouldn't anticipate that a counselor had an initial conversation with the student, picks up the phone and says, I just had this conversation with your child who told me that they're scared to death to tell you that this is a situation that they're in. That counselor may take some time to get that student to a point to where they feel that they can talk to their parent and they can help them have that conversation with their parent in a kind of safe way to where that student feels like they can tell their parent what's going on, but I would hope our counselors help them to have that conversation. So the first time they walk in and say this, counselor may say, hey, come back and see me tomorrow. Let's talk about this. And that counselor may say, how can we talk to your parents about this? How can we get you to where you can share with your parents how you're feeling as well? And then at some point, if the student isn't there, then that counselor will be reaching out, I'm sure.
for me personally, I want the student not to be outed until they got a plan and there's a plan in place and they feel more comfortable. I'm not saying again, I don't want this twisted that we're trying to keep things from parents, but maybe we take a couple weeks and we work with them.
What
and-
if that child has a mental health crisis between those few weeks that
And
you
then
don't
that's when
tell?
we would-
Because that
and-
has happened in other districts where
right.
children have,
Well,
But I also
committed
think that one
suicides,
of the
they've social
issues that,
transition without a parental being notified, so we're gonna take on that liability.
can I answer her real quick, Pete? What I would want the counselor to have the I want them to be the decision maker in that case.
Parents are the
And-
decision maker, I'm
No,
sorry.
and-
Boy, legally, we
no,
could
no.
really be walking into, it's,
If I may,
I'd be really upset if somebody kept any of that information from me.
if I may. So here we are as a bunch of adults, and Aaron, I appreciate you bringing that wisdom once again about policies and how we kind of work through that. This is the reason why in just this last 5 minutes of conversation about this issue, right? You can already get a sensing of what the issues are and walking through whatever frame it is. This is the reason why we need a committee. This is why we need to have counselors and professionals and legal personnel involved, not only in just the liability. And Mary, I know, I got it. But here's the thing that I keep coming back to. Right? Not one frame, not one piece is going to have the complete answer. And if it gives us a better first read and we can have a better discussion about the perspectives that are there, because I'm with you. You know what? I wish people would get this right across the head. Is like, nobody wants the secrets. Right?
You just said that you didn't want to keep it together.
Let me finish, please. But this thing is, it's like adults, the adults in the room, the teachers, the parents, the teachers, the administrators, the counselors. Because when a child is moving into that direction, we just had a full-blown session about how much we know about how well our kids achieve things academically. But it doesn't happen without an environment for them to feel safe and without people that are around there, caring adults. And this is not about somebody assuming rights. This is about responsibilities. And I would just simply ask that I would like to give this to Marty, go to the policy committee, bring the right folks in that should be involved in having a say in shaping this policy, get a first read in a month.
And who are the right people?
The policy committee?
I'd start with the two members of our extensive policy committee, and then I'd also go ahead and bring up Marty, who else you think needs to be involved in this as superintendent?
Before you say anything, Marty, Amy, of course, parents are the decision maker. So they are the decision maker.
They can't make a
So-
decision if they're not being included. And I think, I get what you're saying, like, everybody wants to be sensitive and compassionate and do things at the right time, but that leaves a big window of time, for us to delicately handle a situation that we as a district are not really equipped to handle. This is not a patient-provider counseling session with a guidance counselor. And I wonder if the student is even aware of that when they go see a guidance counselor. Are they presented with a patient confidentiality agreement? This is what I'm going to keep a secret and this is what I'm not. We can't have them coming to a guidance counselor or teacher with an understanding that this is private conversation, because at school, they're not entitled to that. Dangerous.
Marty, do you want to answer Carrie's question?
If you were to ask me, and I appreciate this, if you were to ask me to say who would be on a committee, I think you would have a member, a professional member from the professional counseling area. We have a couple of those in our community, including the counseling center. The guidance center rather. I would also include the attorney to make sure that we had the correct legal interpretation or opinion on this. And I know that then that brings up, well, which attorney should we have? I think we had some people that spoke tonight from both sides of the issue. I think you can have a representative from each side of that issue be part of that. Some who were very adamant that the current policies stay in place, some who were adamant that we look at changing the policy, and I think bringing people into the room that can reasonably talk to each other with the policy committee. That's what I would, I guess, where I would start, or I would recommend. I'd look at what you guys talked about, what I heard, legal aspects, counseling professional aspects. As far as school staff, I think a school counselor to be able to talk about what it is they do, so the committee could hear that and how far they go or what what path they take, and then, the representatives of the parent group could be there. And then students, that would be a decision for the committee to make whether we involve, or at what time we would involve students in that issue as well. So that would be where I would start, is with those representatives, if I was so directed to do that.
So Pete, what I'm trying to understand here, you're not looking to rescind the transgender policy currently. You're looking at sending the current policy to committee that Mr. Kobza had just said to look at and rework that policy to fit more of Lansing. Until we have a first read and a second read, the current policy would stay in place.
You got me, Aaron. Yeah, I'll take that. Let's not rescind the policy, but let's form the committee. Let's make this policy what it needs to be.
And again, I'd like to know, what is it that you want to change?
Can I have the floor for a minute? Can I take it? I haven't spoke yet. Is it all right? Okay.
Well, I guess.
Just sitting here, listening to everyone and everyone that spoke tonight. Number one, I would like to bring up that in December, much like Aaron stated, I wasn't necessarily against the policy. I was against adopting it with Gardner on the name, and I was against the way that we did it. Typically, we do have a first reading, and then a second reading, and then we vote. With that being said, some people that spoke tonight on both sides of the aisle, I heard the word respect. In December, we didn't respect our parents, our staff, or our students because we didn't allow them the time between that first reading and second reading to get the feedback.
It was on the agenda, though.
They had the week. Yes, you're right. They had the week, but they didn't have the month that usually we do on policy readings. As soon as I'm done. It was on there, and to clarify that, Leavenworth guidelines were on there first, and the Gardner was added later. So it wasn't added the exact same day. That's yes. But that's a minor detail, what I'm saying. Okay, can I finish what I did not interrupt you one gosh darn second. So.
Are you trying to transition to talking about how we introduce policy?
I'm trying to finish my statement that I said here and let every single other person talk, but everyone wants to interrupt me for some reason. So what I was saying is, we did not give the respect to both sides, to everyone that spoke in support of the policy or against it. We did not give the respect to anyone in December, in my opinion. Had we given them that respect, we would have sat here in January with the new board, and we would have got feedback, and we possibly would have had some suggestions to the policy at that time. Possibly not. But at least we would have given everybody the time, including the board members, to research it more than just a week. With that being said, if we would have taken that month and done the second reading, and everyone would have had a chance for their feedback and to think everything through, it probably would have passed in January.
Oh.
I
but-
would have voted, I don't know about anybody else, but moving past that, you're asking what is wrong with the policy. This is the small things that I see. I stated in December that we should make it a Lansing policy by going to our faculty and staff to see what we should have in it to make it Lansing. Number one, under support. Support is the measures the district will take to meet a transgender student's needs for the purposes of complying with Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, a federal law that prohibits discrimination based on sex. Do we know what our measures are that Lansing USD 469 is going to take to meet the student's needs? Me personally, I do not know what that answer is. Number two, do we know what Michelle Settles, our Title IX director? Most of that is law, but I do not know the law. I would like to see that in a list of what we're going to follow and what she should be following. To go to that, under support, you go down under notice of transgender student status. Parent notification is necessary for all students under 18 years of age seeking support measures consistent with their gender identity. How do we know what parent notification, when it is necessary, if we don't know what our support measures are? We need to know what the support measures are, because according to this policy, that declares whether or not we notify the parent. And after that, parents, guardians, and students are encouraged to notify a district administrator or counselor of a student's transgender status. The principal, counselor, or other relevant staff members, which could be a teacher like you brought up, Carrie, will meet with the student's parents, guardians, and, when appropriate, the student to discuss the student's needs and district support measures. Once again, what are the district support measures that we plan on using to support this policy and to support the transgender students in this district? In general, the district will only consider support measures requested or discussed with the student's parents, guardians. Once again, how do those students know what support measures to request or to discuss with their parents if they don't know what support measures we are offering? Privacy. School personnel should not disclose information that may reveal a student's transgender status or gender nonconforming presentation to others, including parents and other school personnel, unless legally required to do so, or unless the student has authorized such disclosure. That kind of goes against everything that I just spoke of, because you only notify a parent if they're seeking support measures. Continuing, you go down to responding to requests for support measures. Second paragraph. When a student or parent discloses to a staff member they are seeking advice or support as a transgender student or for a social transition during the school day, staff members should consider the following as appropriate based on the circumstances. Notify the school counselor of the conversation. Bullet point 2, the building principal and the director of student support services should be notified of the request. As far as I know, we do not have a director of student support services. And the last sentence in the policy, I guess it's not the last sentence. Next page, last sentence. A student may remove their request for support measures if they wish to not proceed due to the requirement of parental notification. So if a student does not want their parent to be notified, they can remove their request. They can remove their request for support measures, which we don't have. I guess my big thing with this is, after bringing this stuff up, I feel like there's a lot of things that could happen, or, for example, a student goes in and wants to talk with the counselor. And then if we had the support measures, then they were required to notify the parent. And the student realized that if they withdrawn their request for support, then their parent would not be notified. So is that counselor still legally responsible to notify that parent? That's a question I don't know. That's a legal thing with the law to make sure we're to make sure we are following it. But according to policy, they would not notify the parent. So if that came out that that happened, then that parent is upset because the counselor did not notify them. Then whose side is the district on if that happens? Are we going to follow the policy because the counselor did the right thing and didn't notify a parent when the policy told them not to? Or we had both sides of the aisle up here talking tonight? Or are we going to go at that counselor for not notifying them even though they followed policy? I'll let you
That brings up a good point. I actually had a parent come to me. Doesn't have the transgender issue, but it has to do with counseling in elementary school. And like mentioned before, you get a phone call when they bump their head in gym, when they're sick, they're bad, whatever, behavioral issues, right? But not necessarily when they visit a counselor. So I had spoke with Marty about that and asked him how that went. And so I'm just thinking that maybe possibility to that would be to have an opt-in instead of an opt-out, that you be noted or something at the beginning of the year when a student comes to the school that you sign to whether you're going to be notified anytime your child visits the counselor. And if a parent requests that, they should absolutely be notified. So maybe that would help with that.
So right now, it's up to the counselor to decide if a student, to notify the parent if a student even comes to visit them. It is up to the counselor. Why is it, I guess I don't understand why I would get an email or a note if my daughter gets Tic Tac from the nurse. But if she visits a guidance counselor, somebody would, not to say, hey, let's put all this on a note home, but just to say your daughter or son visited the guidance office. Why isn't that a standard practice?
Agenda for next month.
And in most cases it is. However, if that student is coming into the counseling office to report that they were beaten or abused the night before, that would not be something that we would necessarily notify the parents. We would be calling Health and Human Services in order
Like,
to report that.
Like, call them first, but then send a note home. Your son or daughter visited the guidance office today, right?
Again, in that circumstance, we wouldn't send a note home.
I
We
think with
wouldn't
the
say your
DPS
child
call,
came
that
in and
wouldn't-
said that they were beaten last night. That would be HHS and law enforcement would take it from there.
Yeah, that would be the same day, right? Before the child goes home?
Yes.
Okay. So if the child is going home, why aren't they going with a note?
When you say if the child is going home,
Like if they go to the guidance office
mhm,
and the guidance counselor assesses the kid or student, excuse me, and decides that they are safe to return to class and then return home, why is there no notification to the parent that the child visited the office?
it would depend on the situation. So again, if it was what I described, there wouldn't be a note going home. It would be an HHS because we're mandatory reporters. And if we don't report it, we have charges pressed against us.
I'm
just
saying
like
that they
with
wouldn't be going
nursing.
home. Like,
But I would want to, they're not every issue when a kid goes to, at an elementary school, they might bring their little friend in and sit down and they're not getting along. And so counselor talks to them. I'm just speaking for me, but as a parent, that wouldn't be something that I think I'd need to be notified.
But I would,
okay,
you know,
so-
I'm, it's like, and I think when I get a notice that your daughter got Tylenol today, that to me sends the message that they are on it. Like, these folks are telling me what's going on. But, and I would expect then that, even though I don't know this, but that I would be notified if he or she went to the guidance office, because I get so many other notices. And so that concerns me.
I-
You know, Kirsten, maybe I can explain it this way. If a student in class, they get corrected, you know, maybe by the teacher. The teacher's not gonna call home every time they had to be redirected, or maybe they got in trouble. You know, if that goes on, you know, enough times, you know, of course. But I always felt comfortable trusting my counselors or the social workers to make the call, whether a call was warranted. And I would say they most often erred on the side of caution and would talk to them. But there are some things that kids go to the counselor that their counselors aren't going to see that as necessary to make a call home. So that's the best way I can.
I think I hear what you're saying, and that it's, you know, there's a level of trust, but I wouldn't want to assume that every parent holds that same level of trust, especially with regard to things that are talked about in a guidance office, you know.
I can tell you that counselor's going to spend a lot of time on the phone. I mean,
That's what
I
it
can,
takes. It's one little slip of, not saying, hey, I'm gonna call this parent and we're gonna work this out on the phone, or we're gonna bring them in. I'm not saying have a counseling session. I'm just saying, it might even be better to do like a one-way communication, like no phone call, just FYI, fully transparent. You know, here's a note, your child was seen in the guidance office today. And if the parent says, oh, that's probably a schedule issue, or, you know, she wanted some affirmation or something that she needed help with, interpersonal stuff or whatever, then that's up to the parent to follow up on, right? And that puts it in the parent's court, where it really belongs anyway. I'm just very worried that there's an that, I mean, I'm no stranger to the secret lives of children. Like, I know I've had 3, but I don't want to be party to developing and facilitating a secret life at school for kids. You know, we can, you know, be mindful of the confidentiality, but always with the understanding that kids they're not in that type of relationship with this guidance counselor. It's not a provider. It's not counseling. It's just, hey, we're here for you. Let's help you out. And this is how we do it. But I'm talking too much. Someone else would say something.
Well, no, it's just a concern for the whole district. I mean, to me, I'm just concerned I'm really concerned about the student, the parent, and the legalities of it all. And really, we just don't want to find ourselves, you know, stepping on eggshells around this.
I think a good compromise is what Aaron talked about.
Yeah.
And Aaron, would you like to make a motion on that?
At this point, we have 2 options, or we have two issues on the table. One, you have not rescinding and sending the transgender policy to the policy review committee, as well as including Superintendent Kobza. That group of policy and Kobza include counselors and patrons as they need. Before they have their first meeting, that list comes to us in executive session, because it'll have people's names on it. We can't have that out there. And we make a joint decision on, yes, that's our review committee. And at that point, we review our policy and they send back a first read and a second read for a policy that is considered, quote, a Lansing policy.
How are you going to select the community members?
I personally, I'm gonna leave that one to Marty, and I'm gonna say, Marty, pick from anybody that wants to email in and be part of the committee, email in, and Marty, choose. And state your side, whether you're, leave it exactly where it is, yank it all the way out, find a common ground so that we as a community can say, okay, we have a common ground. I'm not saying that you're ever going to agree, but agree that every person here is for the kids. One side strongly one way, one strongly the other. But let's work together and develop a policy that both sides can find palatable so that we can do what we're supposed to do, and that's be here for the kids.
I agree. No, I agree. I'd like to make a motion then that, and I'm going to screw this all up, but I'd like to make a motion that we do not rescind the current policy as stand, but form a committee to address what Mr. Yocum has just stated, that we appoint the superintendent, Mr. Kobza, to put together the team, and again, identify members of who would be part of that team in accordance with professionals, all stakeholders that are relevant to the issue of this policy, and then to bring it back to executive session so that the executive session approves the committee, and then receive a first read, and then later a second read after that.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and I'm not repeating what Pete just said. Any discussion? Danielle.
Just to be clear, I'm sorry. So we're not delegating our authority to approve a policy. We're just soliciting, we're using this committee to develop improvements to the current policy. Right, okay.
And then the other option would be to leave as is.
Danielle.
Mr. Boland,
Yes.
Mrs. Covey,
No,
Mr. M,
Yes.
Mr. Brungart,
Yes.
Mrs. Workman,
Yes.
Ms. Wood,
Yes.
Mr. Yocum.
Yes.
Motion passed 6-1.